although my body was aching. In my dream I felt safe and warm. Upon waking, I found myself back in my bedroom, but felt an inexplicable coldness and loneliness. Chapter 9. Although some part of me dimly registered the various aches and pains assaulting my body, for some reason I felt secure, safe. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was as in the darkness of sleep I was holding on to something that was protecting and healing me. I didn't want to let go of this source of protection and warmth, so I drew closer, holding it to me dearly. In this moment I thought that everything was right in the world. Tethered to my source of security and holding onto it tightly, I quickly fell deeper into the confines of a dreamless sleep. Some time passed before I felt the coldness begin to seep into my bones. I was no longer clinging to the heat source, and I felt the empty and alone without it. Although I did not know what had been the source of my security in the first place. Without it my body felt isolated, and weak, and the dull ache from my injuries began to return. As my mind awakened, I began to pull away from the impenetrable blackness in which I had slept. Part of my brain wanted to stay asleep and not have to face the world yet, but I fought against this notion. I could now hear my wolf in the back of my mind, and she was urging me to wake up. My eyes snapped open, and I blinked, disoriented. As I adjusted to the lighting in the room I glanced around, determining my location. I felt a small trickle of shock as I realized I was back in my bedroom. The blinds were open and I could see that the sun had just gone down and the moon was beginning to rise. My room was quite warm, but oddly enough I still felt cold. Everything in my room was as I left it. But how had I gotten here? I frowned in puzzlement. The seconds passing by as I tried to work out the mystery of how I had gotten back to my house, when the last thing I remembered was vampires. It all rushed back to me in an instant. I tried to sit up, wincing as my body protested. Everything came back in a flood of images as I arranged myself in a sitting position. Although I was sore, it did not hurt nearly as bad as it should have, and I realized my father must have worked on me. Werewolves heal fast naturally, but there was no way it should be this painless. I assumed I hadn't been asleep more than a day, fervently hoping my assumption was correct. My mind quickly wandered to the last thing I had seen before I dozed off. My father, Will. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And Gabriel had come to my rescue, and I remembered hearing violent fighting behind me as my father crouched before me. The thought of Gabriel fighting the vampires that had hurt me made my wolf growl in satisfaction. I felt a rush of emotion at the thought of my mate, and I had to force it down. I was still supposed to dislike him, and I was beginning to fail miserably, especially since he'd just shown an entirely different side by coming to rescue me. I needed to thank him for that, despite my misgivings about everything. Just then I realized that I could detect a faint sound coming from downstairs. Utilizing my werewolf hearing, I honed in on the noises. Voices emanated upstairs towards my bedroom, and as I listened they began to grow louder until I did not have to strain to hear them. Clearly there was an argument breaking out downstairs. I detected my father's voice first, then Alpha Britt's, then Gabriel's. My mate's husky baritone set me on edge and made my stomach clench in a way that was not at all unpleasant. "You don't have a choice," Gabriel was saying, an undertone of anger in his voice. "She's our daughter. We damn well have a choice." My father snapped back. I gasped quietly in surprise that he would have the gall to talk to Gabriel like that. Then again, they were clearly talking about me, and my father was extremely overprotective. I slowly swung my legs towards the edge of the bed, only wincing slightly this time. I knew the soreness would abate soon. Right now I had more pressing matters to worry about. "Lower your voice," my mom said, her voice quieter than the others. "You'll wake her up. Shouldn't she be waking up soon? She's been out for hours." That was Alpha Brett speaking. The conversation resumed, but their voices were lower, and I decided I should just go downstairs. My skin prickled at the thought of seeing my mate again, and I did rationalize it this time. I was attracted to him and drawn to him, and I couldn't do anything about it. My wolf agreed smugly. That doesn't mean I like him, I said wryly. She ignored me. I stood up, unsteadily at first, but regaining my balance after a few seconds. I glanced down somewhat warily at my attire. I was in a loose shirt and pajama shorts that might be a bit small for present company. You will do no such thing. My father suddenly yelled and my sleepwear was forgotten as I hurried stiffly towards the door. Are you saying you can stop me? Replied Gabriel coldly. The threat behind his words made me uneasy. Are you threatening us while in our territory? Alpha Brett bit out. I had opened the door and started down the stairs. My eyes fell upon the scene occurring in our living room and my agitation only increased. Gabriel had his back towards me, but judging by the stiff way he stood and the tautness of his muscles, he was ready for a fight. Alpha Brett was glaring at him furiously and I was nervous, but for some reason I was more nervous for Alpha Brett than I was for Gabriel. While my Alpha was a strong wolf, I instinctively knew somehow that Gabriel would win in a fight. Surely Alpha Brett would not be foolish enough to take him on one-on-one. That was the lawful setting for an alpha fight to occur. But I hoped he was considering it. Abstinently I wondered, as I had before it passed out, how Gabriel had found out I was in trouble. I resolved to ask later. We had not completed the mating process, so I was sure how he could have known. Was my pain so intense when the vampire bit me that Gabriel felt an echo of it from that far away? I suspected that was the case. For now, though, I had to figure out how to defuse the situation. My parents were off to the side, my mom nervously biting one of her nails as she sat on the couch, my father standing behind her as he gripped the back of the couch. His knuckles were turning white. My father's eyes snapped in my face as Gabriel spoke. You do know I can just command you to make her go with me, right? I froze with dismay as I remembered Gabriel's uncanny ability to command other alphas, an ability that had yet to be explained. Judging by the dark look on Alpha Brett's face, he remembered quite well. And what did he mean? Go with him. What is going on? I cut in before I could stop myself, horrified at the thought that he would command my family or Alpha like that. Gabriel spun around in an instant, and all eyes focused on me. I blushed, not liking the sudden attention. Gabriel's dark eyes became unfathomable before slowly roving up and down my exposed legs. My blush deepened and I felt my heart rate skyrocket because of his close scrutiny. You're awake? My mother's voice broke the tension as she bounded over to me before pulling me into a tender hug. Minding my injuries, still feeling embarrassed, I tried to smile at her as she pulled back. Blue eyes meeting mine. Oh, Skylar, I was so worried. We never should have let you go, she began, features contorting with sadness. Renee, we have more important things to worry about right now, my father said tiredly, indicating Gabriel with a jerk of his head. Although we would talk about her decision to go later. His look became stern, but I detected relief as he gazed at me. What's going on? I asked cautiously. I could still feel Gabriel's penetrating gaze trained on me. I shifted uncomfortably. Alpha Brett began to speak, but Gabriel cut him off. You're coming to live with me, he said tonelessly. I cowed at resist looking at him then, and I was sure my surprise and uncertainty were evident on my face as my mouth fell open slightly with shock. His eyes caught and held mine, and my wolf began to pace restlessly as my body heated up yet again. How could he look so sexy just standing there? His dark hair was tousled, and his shirt did nothing to hide his physique. I definitely wanted to. Damn it, Skylar. Stop. I scolded my body's reactions. I had to get myself under control. No, you aren't, my father bit out, distracting me from my traitorous lust. Gabriel's inscrutable expression became angry and he wrenched his gaze from mine. Yes, she is. I don't care if you're her father, I will command you. Do not forget who you are talking to. I am being courteous by telling you instead of commanding you, but I won't hesitate to make this an order. My father shook with anger but did not move. I could tell he was weighing the options in his head. As for me, I was quite sure what to think. Of course my wolf was howling at me to go, and a large part of me did not want to leave his side. But the logical side of me was afraid. Live with him, with the Black Mountains pack that I hated. I would be away from my family when I barely knew him. How could I do that? Did I even have a choice? I knew realistically, if I wanted to get to know him better, I needed to live with him. That was how it traditionally worked when mates were from different packs. Anyways, getting to know him was both a terrifying and alluring concept. Alpha Brett looked like he wanted to snarl but was very much trying to rein himself in. I was worried that either he or my father would make a stupid move, and I cowled and let that happen. It was my mate, so my problem to deal with. I gathered every ounce of courage that I had. Guys, could I talk to Gabriel? The name felt so perfect coming out of my mouth, and out of the corner of my eye saw my mate stiffen. Alone, please. I was almost quaking with nervousness at the thought of being alone with him, but the tension in here could be cut with a knife, and I had to do something. My father looked like he very much did not want to leave me alone with Gabriel, but my mother saw the look in my eye and gently put a hand on his arm. Alexander, it's what she wants, she said hesitantly, looking between me and Gabriel. Alpha Brett had shoved his hands in his pockets and was staring at Gabriel mistrustfully. Okay, Skylar, let me know if you need anything. He ground out after several seconds before tossing my parents a look and striding out of the room. My father opened his mouth to protest, but I spoke before he could. Please, let me handle this. Just for a minute. I silently played with my eyes, even though part of me was freaking out at being here alone with Gabriel. Hopefully I could control my wolf before she tried to make me jump him. With an angry huff, my father finally nodded. But if you decide to go, it better be your choice and only your choice. If not, we'll have an entirely different discussion. He snarled. If he'd been speaking in that manner to any other wolf, it would have been incredibly intimidating. In this situation, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Gabriel merely turned to face him, a threatening growl rumbling in his chest in response. I shivered at the sound, trying to hold myself together while giving my father half-hearted smile. Then my parents left and I was alone with my mate. Gabriel slowly turned back towards me. I couldn't help but admire the way the dim lighting in the room created shadows that fell across his face, accentuating his handsome features. I could now understand why everyone said that when you found your mate, it was as if they were made just for you, created just to be with you. Gabriel was the most physically perfect specimen I could ever imagine. I felt frail and underwhelming in comparison. For a split second Gabriel looked uncertain before he resumed his unfathomable expression. His posture had relaxed slightly, although he still looked somewhat uneasy. I couldn't blame him. It was especially difficult to focus with my wolf conjuring up inappropriate images in the back of my mind. Although Gabriel stood a good 10 feet from me, I could feel the tension crackling in the air. It was nearly unbearable. You could have asked me first, I finally said, breaking the taut silence. You were unconscious when I made the decision, he replied unapologetically. It would have been easier to wake me up than to threaten my family. Unable to keep the accusatory tone out of my voice, I didn't like the idea of them being bullied by my mate just because he always got what he wanted. Threaten? Slightly incredulous. If you thought that was me truly threatening them, you're more nervy than I thought. I blinked, feeling a surge of irritation at his condescending tone. I had a pride streak a mile wide and did not like being spoken to like that. Well, you were talking about commanding them, I began, but he cut me off. I will command them if they try to argue, he replied dismissively. Do I get no choice in the matter? I demanded, feeling a surge of bravery despite Gabriel's intimidating presence. His gaze hardened. Not when you do reckless things, like go to a town infested with vampires. I clenched my fists, feeling my anger rise. How was I supposed to know there were vampires there? I didn't even know vampires existed. Unlike you, apparently, because they knew all about you. Gabriel actually looked slightly guilty for a split second, taking a step forward. I'd heard about them. That answer seemed oddly vague to me, but I didn't have time to argue before he continued. I didn't know they would come after you. I did not feel any less angry. Well, they did. I don't understand how I'm so reckless when they'd only came after me to ask where you were. The last few days had made me short-tempered and braver than usual. Or perhaps I was getting used into his presence. I was learning how to speak my mind in front of him. I didn't think you'd leave your pack and go looking for trouble, or I would have warned you. And the slightly condescending tone was back. I gritted my teeth as I felt another rush of anger. I was looking for trouble. I was trying to stop thinking about you, I replied heatedly, my cheeks feeling exceptionally warm as I admitted that. He seemed taken aback, staring at me with his inscrutable expression back in place. I went to town to clear my mind. I had no idea it'd be captured by beings that I thought were mythical and men physically abused while they tried to get me to tell them their location. I continued, my tone darkening as I remembered my painful experience. That, combined with Gabriel's cold and antagonistic attitude right now, was incredibly aggravating, and had no idea why he was acting like this was entirely my fault. Sure, he'd gone to the town, and he followed the scent of blood thinking someone was in trouble. Who would have guessed that I would be captured by vampires? But he had come after me to save me. Right. Surely that meant something. Despite his inexplicable attitude at the moment, I blinked and took a shocked step backwards as Gabriel suddenly appeared in front of me, only a foot away. The electricity between us intensified, and I felt my wolf stirring with lust now that her mate was within arm's reach. I looked down at the ground, afraid to look in his eyes. I was sure why he was acting the way he was, but I was beginning to realize that I felt hurt that he seemed to blame me for the whole vampire incident. I tore them apart, he said softly, his voice deep with suppressed emotion. I slowly looked up to see that his eyes were intense, burning with something unrecognizable. I gave those vampires what they deserved for touching you. I felt goosebumps rise along my arms, and inside I felt a small thrill at his protective words. Although I was still confused by his mood swings, I quickly averted my gaze, afraid of what I would do if I looked at him for too long. A few tense seconds passed by before he spoke again. I want you to come with me so I can keep an eye on you. The vampires won't give up on you. But my family is here, I replied softly, still looking away. I knew my argument was weak. It was normal for a wolf to leave their family behind when they found their mate. I was just reaching for excuses now. In an alpha, you can't honestly think my wolf will just stand and let you stay here, he retorted. Bullying my pack is not the way to go about it. To my agent extraordinaire, Mylan Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Matching his tone, I thought I heard a faint growl in his chest. Like I said, they don't have a choice. His tone had become unapologetic again. I detected a trace of irritation. But I do, and damn it, Skylar, Gabriel snapped, my name sounding wonderful in his husky voice. I felt a flutter of fear as he advanced, and suddenly I was backed up against the wall as he leaned over me, his arms above my head on each side as he supported his weight. His scent washed over me, and my nostrils flared as I took it in. Despite his daunting stance, I couldn't help the butterflies that erupted in my stomach as he said my name. Nor could I help the secret invigoration as I saw the frustration etched on his face, although my attraction was mingled with unease. Do you have any idea what it is like to feel your mate's excruciating pain and not be able to do anything about it because she's hours away? She's suffering, and you weren't there to protect her. Dimly I realized that my suspicions were confirmed, that he knew I was in danger when he felt the bite. He must have run incredibly fast to make it all the way to town and meet up with the others in half a day. I began hesitantly. You could have died. Quieter now, his eyes boring into mine. His voice had taken on a rough edge. I thought I could detect true emotion in his expression, and it bewildered me, as I'd never seen him look vulnerable, even for a split second. The moment passed, but I could still feel the heat of his conviction. I was hyper, aware of just how close we were, and I urged to reach a hand up and stroke his face, feel the muscles on his arms and chest. Instead, I maintained a straight face and held my arms at my sides, trying not to let my body betray me. I am not risking that again. So whether you like it or not, you are accompanying me back to my home. He backed away then, and I felt a rush of disappointment at the lack of contact, feeling as if air was being pulled out of my lungs. I wanted to be near him so badly it was like oxygen. and inhaling his scent was so compelling to me, and my wolf, the thought of that scared me. But I was even more frightened of the way my heart was beating erratically in my chest due to the brief glimmer of sincerity I had seen in his expression. He did care for me on some level, and I was afraid of what he was doing to me. And deep inside of me, I knew I would go with him. Not only because my wolf was refusing to let me stay, or because Gabriel might force my family into letting me go if I refused, but because part of me truly did want to go. He may have been an emotional asshole at times, but there was something else there. Something deep down. Fate had given me Gabriel for a reason. Perhaps I was supposed to help him and balance him out. I knew it would be foolish to give away the only mate I would have trying to get to know him. I would miss my family, but we shared pack territory. And I knew there was a way I'd be able to see them. As for the Black Mountains pack, as much as they frightened me, I knew they killed and hurt me. My mate was their alpha. This is the right decision, my wolf whispered softly in my mind. She sounded so sure of herself. Although I knew she was incredibly biased in this situation, I slowly raised my gaze, finally meeting Gabriel's. His emotionals mask was back in place, but I wouldn't forget that brief emotion I had seen in his dark eyes. If you promise to leave my family and pack alone, I will go with you, I said quietly. I was fully aware that he could be brutal and force me to come with no promises, but I hoped he wouldn't. Besides, if he gave his word not to harm my pack, it would help assuage some of my concerns. Gabriel looked away, jaw clenched. I have more significant problems at the moment, was his reply, and I took that as the best affirmative I was going to get. I exhaled wearily. At least let me say goodbye. Can we wait until the morning? I didn't want to go very long before seeing my parents again, but I figured it was not the best time to negotiate with Gabriel. He was wound tightly enough already. Make it quick. I've been away from my pack for long enough. His tone was clipped, and I sighed internally. It seemed as if that slight glimpse of true emotion was all I would be getting for a while. An hour or two later, I stood outside with my family and close friends around me in a semicircle. My father had not liked my decision, to say the least. It had taken a considerable amount of arguing and pleading and reasoning to get him to fully understand where I was coming from, and I could tell he only conceded my point because he didn't want Gabriel resorting to more drastic measures to bring me back to his pack. Not that my father could have really stopped either one of us from the beginning. It was werewolf custom to live with one's mate. Despite his reluctance, I knew my father really did understand. After Gabriel had come to help rescue me from the vampires, he had earned the tiniest sliver of my father's trust. At least when it came to me. When I explained to him at a later my mother that this is what I had decided, that I wanted to give my mate a chance, they eventually caved. I knew they disliked Gabriel, but, as my mate and an alpha, it was his right by law to bring me to his pack if I chose to go. It was going against nature to keep a wolf from her mate. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing clichés enthusiasm. Alpha Brett gave me a gruff hug before walking away, leaving me with my parents. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing clichés enthusiasm. And Will, my mom had tears in her bright blue eyes. We were currently standing in a clearing a couple of hours from my house. Gabriel was located near enough to hear our conversation, but at a respectable distance, for which I was grateful. I didn't need his unnerving presence when I felt so vulnerable. Poised and alert, gazing into the distance, my mom wrapped me into what must have been my 10th hug, a blonde curl touching my cheek as she nuzzled me. I felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving her. My father was next, pulling me into a secure embrace. Don't forget to mind link with us every day, he said softly, attempting to make a wry joke. I smiled slightly and his face grew serious. Skylar, let me know if you need anything. His look was significant and I caught the double meaning behind his words. Next, Maria came forward, wrapping a dark tress of hair around her finger like she always did when she was nervous. Skylar, she began softly. Her eyes contained so much worry that I hugged her tightly on reflex. I never got to thank you guys for everything. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Noticing I had come forward and was standing next to us, he tried to grin reassuringly, but it came out more as a grimace. You would have done it for me, Maria replied, smiling slightly. I'm just glad you're okay. She squeezed my hand tightly. Come visit soon. We need to catch up on Law and Order. I laughed at that and was passed over to Will. I relaxed into the familiarity of his hug, inhaling his scent. He had consistently been there for me, and had always appreciated his companionship. He released me, raising one of his hands to gently cup my cheek. An unusual, almost haunted look came into his blue eyes as he studied me intensely, eyes examining every inch of my face. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Confused by his expression, he licked his lips, almost appearing nervous. His thumb stroked my cheek and I shifted slightly, aware of my mate's presence nearby. I got the impression that Will was gathering the courage for something, and the only reason he was about to say it was because it might be his last chance for a while. Skylar, I will begin, voice cracking slightly as he spoke. Wondering what the hell was up with him, he hesitated, as if deciding if whatever he was about to say was really a good idea. I got a strange sense of foreboding and quickly spoke. Don't worry, Will. He'll be back soon. I know it's just. He was interrupted by a low, threatening growl nearby. I quickly stepped away from all to see that Gabriel had come over to us and was standing next to me, glaring daggers at Will. His hands were balled into fists and his expression looked murderous. Get away from her, pup, Gabriel snarled, and I was shocked by the venom in his tone. Will gave me a frustrated look as his face flushed to be dread. He quickly turned and strode away, my mate glaring after him. I shot Maria a confused look, but she just looked very uncomfortable, giving me a small wave before walking off as well. Calm down. You shouldn't talk to, I began, turning towards my mate, but Gabriel had picked up my bag of necessities in one hand and was already striding towards the trees. At least he was nice enough to carry it for me. I thought wryly, although it was heavy to me. We need to get going. Anger still evident in his voice. Apparently he was not going to be in a good mood for this trip. Sighing, I gave both of my parents one last hug before heading towards the green fringe of the forest. I gave a final wave over my shoulder before entering the forest, where I would be running in wolf from in front of my mate for the first time. And within a day I would be living with him. Despite my reservations, I couldn't help but feel slightly hopeful as I thought about what the future held. Chapter 10. The cool breeze whispered across my bare skin, making me shiver slightly. The moon was high in the sky and I could feel my wolf whining inside of me. She was itching to be let out. Goosebumps covered my body, although that might have been due more to my nervousness than the crisp air. I was currently behind the large, twisted trunk of a tree, completely naked but outside of Gabriel's line of sight as I prepared to shift. Part of me had the urge to step outside of the shelter of the trees, just to see his reaction, but I quelled the thought. I wasn't ready for that sort of intimacy yet. I barely knew Gabriel, and I still wasn't sure exactly how I felt. My wolf, however, was making her intentions clear. We knew that our mate was standing not too far from us and that he was completely unclothed as well. My body itched to be near him, bare flesh pressed against bare flesh. The thought made me shiver again. And not from the cold this time. Behave yourself. I instructed my wolf. She would be much more prominent in my consciousness as soon as I shifted, and her instincts would be hard to resist, although I could still rein her in with enough willpower. She winced slightly, disagreeing with me but partially understanding where I stood. I'm not ready for that yet. You know that, I continued softly, although her animalistic urges would be hard for her to ignore. We were bound together. She could feel what I was feeling. I knew she'd take that into account and not act too rashly. I felt a slight sense of begrudging agreement emanate from her. I'd have to keep an eye on her. I picked up the large bag that held my clothes and necessities, loosening the straps as much as I could and putting it on my back. Gabriel had been prepared to carry it, but I hadn't been sure that the straps could even loosen up enough for the bag to fit on his back when he was in wolf form. As an alpha, he would be much bigger than me. Admittedly, I had also been tired of him bossing me around all evening and wanted to do something for myself. So I had insisted and then grabbed the bag from where he had set it on the ground before he could respond. The bag hung off of my small form but would fit tightly once I had shifted. I knew it would look comical, a wolf wearing a large bag on its back, but it was the most convenient way. Closing my eyes, I willed the shift onwards. Instantly my shoulders hunched and I fell forward, my bones realigning themselves as I transformed into a different being entirely. A wolf's first shift was painful, but now the sensations didn't hurt in the slightest. He crushed from my core outwards and I felt a tickling sensation as claws exploded from my limbs and sprouted from my skin. As my large paws hit the ground, I felt my canines elongate and a rush of overpowering smells as my wolf senses became predominant. I shook off the last vestiges of a shifting sensation, fighting the urge to yip in excitement. I desperately needed a run, and my wolf was overjoyed that we would be running with our mate. I was a bit more preoccupied about the idea, but I had no choice in the matter. I could only hope our wolves would control themselves so we didn't find ourselves in an awkward situation back in human form. I padded out from behind the twisted tree, my silver fur glowing softly in the moonlight. I was above average size for a female, but I had no doubt that Gabriel would still tower over me. My wolf's eyes, the same shade of blue as my own, roved the forest as we searched for. It didn't take long for him to emerge from the thick foliage. I immediately froze in place, awestruck. He was larger than any wolf I had ever seen, although this did not surprise me. His fur was thick and pitch black, the color matching his hair. He was nearly indiscernible from the deep shadows of the forest. Gabriel's entire form rippled with thick muscles and he radiated power, both alpha power and sheer physical strength. My wolf growled softly, clearly pleased and even slightly intimidated as he approached us silently. He seemed to be taking us in, too, his dark eyes flickering with interest. He made a brief sound deep in his throat. It sounded like approval, and I fervently hoped I was right. I would be completely humiliated if Gabriel's wolf was not at all impressed by how he looked in our wolf form. Gabriel stopped several feet from us, his wolf inhaling our scent. I kept my paws firmly planted to the ground, not stepping any closer to him. I was pretty sure Gabriel's wolf wanted us, but there was no telling what he'd do if we acted on our more basic impulses. His unfathomable gaze observed our form for a few seconds more before he jerked his head in the direction of the trees. My wolf padded after him obediently, staying a few feet behind but close enough so his alluring scent surrounded us. Gabriel quickly broke into a faster pace and I followed suit, enjoying the feeling of stretching my stiff muscles. I barely even felt my injuries anymore, especially in this form. I had a sneaking feeling that Gabriel was slowing himself down slightly to accommodate me, but I pushed myself, easily keeping up with him. I cowled at one at an eight's pace, but my wolf and I wanted to show him that we were in perfectly good shape. The forest whizzed by and the wind whistled through our fur as we sped towards our destination, the moon rising ever higher into the sky. It was a pity that we couldn't mind link with him. That wasn't possible until the actual mating was completed. He had to mark me and I him during. I stopped my train of thought right there. The idea of that sort of intimacy excited my wolf but made me huff in embarrassment. And I would have been blushing in human form. Gabriel briefly glanced over his shoulder at my quiet exhalation, feeling my embarrassment worsen. I tried to focus on something other than the giant wolf running in front of me. I wondered if my pack would be angry at me. Only those that had sent me off knew where I was going to avoid more of a confrontation. Alpha Brett wasn't telling the others until tomorrow. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. All of them already knew that Gabriel had paid us a visit to help them find me. Surely they could have guessed what would be coming. I could only hope they didn't begrudge my decision, that it had helped ensure my pack's safety. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They wouldn't have wanted to witness Gabriel's fury if I had blatantly refused to go with him. We ran like that for several hours. As we continued our quick pace, I grew increasingly lonely without anyone to talk to. I could have contacted my pack, but I figured they would think I was chickening out already. And I didn't want that. Who I really wanted to talk to was running to my right, only a few feet in front of me, close enough to catch my signal if I indicated that I needed to stop, but far enough that our coats weren't touching. My wolf, too, was frustrated. The whole point of this venture was to get to know Gabriel, to assure that fate really had made the right decision and that there was something there beyond the merciless tyrant everyone made him out to be. So far, it was not going well. I had no way to speak with him at all, and I would have to wait until we returned to our human forms. Hungry and frustrated, I growled slightly to get his attention. Slowing my pace, Gabriel glanced at me from the corner of his eye before slowing. As we came to a halt, he turned to face me, an inquisitive look evident in his features. He probably thought I was weak and tired already. I was more frustrated than anything, but I knew I needed to eat soon if I wanted to keep up that pace. I had recently been injured. Surely he realized I wouldn't have as much endurance as I normally did. I growled and sniffed the air, hoping he would realize what was going on. I thought I detected the faint scent of rabbit, so I meandered further into the woods, padding lightly as I followed my nose. I noticed that Gabriel was following me at a safe distance, giving me plenty of room to hunt. I cut through the undergrowth at an angle and maneuvered myself so I was downwind of my prey. Rabbit was my favorite, but it would do I hadn't scented any herds of large game anywhere near the area. Rabbit had been the only prey bigger than squirrels that I could find. Recently, I crouched low to the ground, silently stalking the small animal. It had always amazed me how quiet my kind could be considering our enormous size. We were far more graceful than any other animals this large. I didn't have to hunt often since I only ate raw meat in wolf form, but my wolf enjoyed the predatory practice and I let her revel in her ferocity. In the back of my mind, I knew that Gabriel, or at least his wolf, would probably be interested in how well we hunted. Moments later we had leapt swiftly on the rabbit as it scurried out of its den, breaking its neck with a twist of jaws. Without preamble I dug into the fresh meat. I felt my ravenous hunger take over. Madness meant nothing to a wolf. I was so absorbed in my dining that I didn't think before acting as Gabriel approached me. All I registered was that there was a wolf infringing upon the prey that I had caught. I had a single-minded focus on devouring my food, and it was my prey. Seeing another wolf so close to my kill infuriated me, and I reacted on pure instinct without a human's logical thought intervening. Growling low in my throat, I snapped at Gabriel's legs in warning before realizing my mistake a second later. Gabriel snarled furiously at my disrespect, and in one instant he had barreled me onto my back and had me pinned down. One massive pop landed on my chest. My backpack was crushed underneath me from my own considerable weight, and I winced, hoping nothing was smashed. I felt a surge of regret and fear as he towered over me, leaning close. Gabriel had me pinned tightly, though not with a necessary force. It was as if he was trying to avoid causing me pain. He was growling slightly, his lip curled to reveal one dangerously sharp canine. I mentally reprimanded my wolf, although I knew it was equally my fault for getting so absorbed in my food. I had disrespected an alpha male, and one with a short temper at. I knew he hadn't been approaching me to steal my kill, regardless of his motivations. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I had snapped at him, which was completely unacceptable. Yet, as he leaned over, I felt another emotion rising besides the fear. I could not quell it. Lust. I could feel my lust rising at my mate's close proximity to me, and I began to squirm slightly as I realized I was in a dangerous position. Gabriel's wolf's eyes had darkened considerably until they were completely black. They burned with a bright intensity, and I could almost feel his own desire rising. He leaned even closer until his snout was inches from me. Inhaling deeply, I felt my thirst on end as I tried not to whimper. Thankfully, something else happened then. or I'm not sure where that would have gone. Gabriel's powerful sense of smell obviously detected something else as he inhaled, for his head snapped up and he lifted his paw from my chest. His ears pricked and I heard another growl erupt from his throat, this one much more threatening. I attempted to struggle to my feet, but in a flash he had shoved me down again with his paw. While I was still laying there, belly up, he moved and placed his front legs on either side of my body. He remained in this protective stance, glancing around, the deep growl continuing to erupt from his chest. Gabriel's fur stood on end and I took a whiff of the air. Despite my potent sense of smell, I howled and detect anything. Gabriel, however, obviously sensed something was there, for he continued to stand over me defensively. I didn't move, trusting his alpha instincts. While I was fond of my vulnerability, my wolf and I found that we rather liked the protective way our mate towered above us. We remained locked in these positions, my earlier mistake forgotten, for another moment or two before Gabriel's fur flattened again. He stepped away from me, allowing me to scramble up. I whined softly. He shook his head in a very wolf-like gesture, and I resolved to ask him what the hell that was about as soon as we shifted back. Feeling uneasy, we resumed our trek, although Gabriel first waited a moment longer for me to devour the remaining half of the rabbit. I couldn't shake the prevailing sense of unease, remembering the last time someone had been watching me in the forest, and what had happened to me just days after. The rest of the trip was uneventful, although I did make him stop 3 times more throughout the date-wise for brief rest periods. I was still recovering from my experience with the vampires. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, and was weaker than normal and wants to hunt again. We shared no more uncomfortable moments, for which I was glad. Contact with Gabriel made me weak and vulnerable, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Besides, he seemed to want to maintain the barrier he erected around himself. The cool distance he kept. Aside from a few brief glimmers of emotion, I didn't really know him, though my body yearned to be closer to him. I was worried about the daunting task that lay ahead. His territory was much more difficult to traverse than mine. For a few hours now we had been navigating rocky slopes and steep inclines. The foliage was patchy, and as we climbed higher and the sun began to rise in the sky, the landscape around us was thrown into clarity. I wanted to stop and observe, as it was far more beautiful than expected. The ridges and slopes were a different sort of natural beauty than I was used to in my home valley, but I could appreciate them all the same. Gabriel, however, pressed on relentlessly, and I tried to absorb as much as I could. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. This would be my home for a while now. The thought definitely made me nervous. Soon I would be meeting his pack for the first time. It had just getting dark when we arrived, meaning it took us a little less than an entire day to travel to his village. I again realized that Gabriel must have run almost impossibly fast to get to my village in half the day when he was coming to save me. Gabriel stopped as the trees, already much less prevalent than near my valley, began to thin out even further. I thought I could see the tops of houses over the next ridge. Gabriel jerked his head towards the bag that I had strapped to my back, indicating that I should shift back. I obliged, feeling a wave of nervousness crash over me. I hid behind a small copse of trees and quickly changed form, the large pack sliding off of my now human figure. I opened it and dressed myself quickly before striding out to meet Gabriel. My cheeks reddened slightly as his gaze touched mine. I looked down at the ground, remembering our moment from earlier. I was all too aware that our mating pull may be slightly more difficult to resist now that we'd interacted in wolf form. It didn't take long to climb the last slope, which was considerably steeper than the others. I felt my nervousness increase tenfold as we finally reached the top. I tried not to gasp as the pack village was laid out before me. The ground dipped downwards immediately in front of us so that the nearest houses were actually in a valley of sorts, but I noticed more houses situated on rocky crags in the distance. I was sure what I expected, but it certainly was this. The houses were less updated and modern than mine, clearly built to serve a rudimentary purpose and not as decoration. However, They were still large and well kept, situated amidst scraggly trees and small, rolling hills. There were many more houses than I was used to, testifying to the size and strength of Gabriel's pack. Not too far from us stood a three-story house that somehow looked more elegant than the others. It was also the largest house that I could see. "That's where you live," Gabriel said gruffly. His face was expressionless, but by his stance I could tell he was proud of his pack village. For what he'd heard of the Black Mountains pack before meeting them, I would have expected this place to be much less civilized. I eyed his house again. It seemed a little grand for his taste, but then I remembered that his father had probably designed it. Gabriel had only been alpha for 4 years. "Come on," he said coolly, and I couldn't help but feel confused as to why he was being so brusque. It was his idea that I come here in the first place. Shouldn't he be more excited about it? I furrowed my brow. Gabriel was too unpredictable. A puzzle like ours didn't work out. It was then that I realized that I had yet to see another werewolf. Where were they? I opened my mouth to ask the question, but snapped it shut as I realized Gabriel was leading me away from his house. He led me through the center of town, leaving me to quickly absorb everything as I passed. To my surprise, they had electricity. I felt somewhat stupid for thinking they lived like cavemen. But they were so isolated, I was surprised they had any modern conveniences at all. We wandered a convoluted route through the village, twisting and turning around many houses and other buildings, the purpose of which I could not determine. Just as I was growing impatient, we edged along a narrow path on the side of a small cliff, and the ground opened up in front of arch, grassy field. The expansive scenery was beautiful, but that is not what made me catch my breath. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Situated in the field was the rest of Gabriel's pack, some standing and some sitting. There were well over 100 of them, clearly waiting on us. All of their eyes were fixated on me. I clenched my hands together in front of me, knowing my nervousness was easily discernible. All of them had stood up eagerly after they saw Gabriel. I had never enjoyed being the center of attention, and having so much focus on me was disconcerting. Hundreds of eyes examined me from top to bottom, analyzing me and judging me. I wanted to cower behind Gabriel until the attention was no longer on me, but knew that would make a bad impression, so I straightened my back and kept walking until Gabriel came to a halt. A massive, muscular werewolf with deep brown skin and a shaved head broke from the pack and strode forwards. I recognized him from the meeting as Gabriel's beta. "Welcome back," somewhat gruffly, and Gabriel nodded. The beta turned to me, examining me closely. I felt a prickle of nervousness but did not look away, standing strong under his scrutiny. To my surprise, one of the corners of the beta's mouth twitched into a half-smile. I blinked, not expecting that reaction. The beta turned back to Gabriel. "I trust your journey was uneventful. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." He asked formally. "Eli, I'd like to get right to it." Gabriel responded shortly, although there was no venom or irritation in his tone. I could tell Eli was used to such responses, for he merely unmoved to stand behind Gabriel like I was. Though on Gabriel's other side, Gabriel cleared his throat. "As you all know, I left the village in order to retrieve my mate. I wondered if HED told them about the vampires. This is Skylar. She will be living here from now on." His tone was clipped and I felt confused. Yet again. Apparently that was becoming my permanent state around Gabriel. I tried to brush it away as the attention was refocused on me. There was silence for a few seconds, only broken by a few hushed murmurs. Once again, I felt daunted by the presence of the Black Mountains pack. Aside from the youngest wolves, all of them looked cautious and battle-hardened. I saw any cold and calculating looks from the pack members. These weren't wolves that accepted outsiders easily. Will she be going through the formal induction? One she-wolf asked. I held my breath. "Yes. It is law," Gabriel replied calmly. I felt my nervousness spike as I wondered what exactly that would entail. every pack had a way of introducing new members into the pack, that every ritual was different. Would that mean they were planning to make me an official member of the Black Mountains pack? Could I go through with that? If I planned on staying with Gabriel, I knew I had to. Still, the concept of becoming a member of this pack was not yet appealing to me. I didn't know any of them, and my entire experience with this pack, short of Gabriel helping save me from the vampires, had been negative. Gathering my courage, I let my eyes roam the crowd. My gaze locked with that of another she-wolf, a redhead with long, silky hair. Her bright blue eyes were cold and hostile, and my wolf stirred within me, not liking the redhead's expression. What was her problem? Did she just despise outsiders? Holding my glare for one more second, the redhead coolly turned her head away. I tried not to let my anger show. As I kept looking around at the crowd, I realized that the redhead was not the only one who disliked me on sight. It was not a reaction specific to her. Several others gave me the exact same look she did. As I suspected, I was not welcome here. The crowd was whispering and muttering again, and Gabriel raised his hand to silence them. She will be living with me. Her battle skills and value added to the pack will be tested shortly. I didn't like the way he talked about me so casually, not showing any emotion. Most wolves would be proud to display their mate to the pack. I looked down abruptly, swallowing the lump that had risen in my throat. I thought I saw the beta looking at me from the corner of his eye, and I tried to put on a brave face. Dimly, I registered an incredulous snort from one of the larger male wolves. You sure she can keep up with us? Her pack doesn't train as diligently as we do. I had to clench my teeth together to keep from snarling at him, blood boiling at the insult to my pack. I felt my fingernails dig into my palms, and tried very hard to maintain a cool effade. Nothing good come out of me, losing my temper here. Still, my wolf growled furiously. I saw Gabriel's expression harden considerably. Are you doubting my judgment? He said coldly. The other wolf snapped his mouth shut and looked away. Although he still looked dubious, Eli has already briefed you on everything else, so we will have our next pack meeting in a week. Usual time. If there aren't any other questions, then you all are dismissed. There were no other questions, and I noticed the pack begin to disperse, many of them still glancing at me. I turned my head away, unable to deal with so many wolves at once. That hadn't gone worse than expected, but I wished their reactions would have been friendlier. I guess I cowed and hoped for a warm welcoming given which pack I was from. My pack would not have treated an outsider from the Black Mountains pack any differently. I knew. I noticed that two wolves, a male and a female, had come forward, and Gabriel had walked over to meet them, so I stood on my own an awkward distance from the others. Although my wolf was growing increasingly attracted to him, part of me was already regretting my decision. As if reading my thoughts, I noticed Eli approaching me. I didn't really get to introduce myself. Him, Eli, the beta, giving me a slight smile as he offered his hand. His brown eyes seemed sincere, and although the gesture seemed formal, I appreciated it, and I gladly took his hand. Skylar, I said softly. Welcome to the pack. I know it seems like a bit much, but you'll get used to it. I nodded. I don't think I really have a choice, I said honestly. Eli shrugged. I know it seems strange coming here, but obviously it was meant to be. He indicated Gabriel with his head. It seems so, I replied vaguely, chewing on my bottom lip. I only wished I could know what Gabriel was thinking. Did he show you a rounder? Sort of, I replied, remembering my rushed tour where Gabriel hadn't actually told me about anything. There was a knowing look in Ellie's eyes, and I felt like he must be more comfortable with Gabriel than anyone else. Well, let me know if you need anything. I smiled gratefully in response. And oh, just a minute. I have to take care of this. He cut off, turning and approaching a wolf that was hovering nearby, leaving me by myself again. I cowed and helped the prickle of irritation that emerged as I observed Gabriel still talking to the two wolves. I may have been patient and reserved compared to some, but that didn't mean I liked being practically ignored by my own mate. He had gotten distant ever since we left my pack, and I couldn't help but feel that I had done something wrong. I worried that I had made the wrong choice coming here. So far he'd been about as warm and inviting as a brick wall. As much as I was still getting used to the idea of Gabriel being my mate, I had made the effort to come all this way. Hadn't I earned better treatment than the cold shoulder? My stomach clenched unpleasantly as I noticed the redhead from earlier approaching Gabriel, joining in their conversation. They weren't too far away and I pricked my ears, not caring if it was rude to eavesdrop. The conversation itself was innocent enough, not giving me any cause to worry. I suspected it was just my insecurity emerging, as she really was quite beautiful. Fortunately, seconds later Gabriel disengaged himself from the conversation and came towards me. I tried not to let my flare of irritation make me do anything stupid. "I have business to take care of back home if you're ready," he said calmly, although I got a sneaking suspicion that he wouldn't care if I was ready or not. I shrugged non-committal, and we turned and headed back the way we came, hands just inches away from brushing. Despite our proximity, I couldn't help but feel like there was a massive distance between us. His house really was something to behold. It was elegantly and very formally furnished, with a massive stone fireplace being the center of attention in the living room. There were plenty of plush armchairs and leather couches to accommodate a small crowd, and the color scheme was rich and inviting. Gabriel showed me the living room, kitchen rustic, but large, and dining room which looked like it was barely used, before leading me up the curved staircase to the second floor. We strode down to the end of the hall where he opened the door. A large four-poster bed stood against the wall. It looked like it had been recently made. There were large windows on either side of the bed and a comfortable armchair in the corner. I felt a prickle of excitement upon seeing a shelf with plenty of books that would occupy me for days. The room was designed in the same rich colors, deep red, creamy white, and brown, as the rest of the house. Lastly, a door in the back clearly led to a private bathroom. There was one thing that confused me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. If this was Gabriel's room, why did it look like nobody ever stayed here? "This will be your room. Mine is upstairs," Gabriel said quietly from behind me. My heart sank at his words and I felt as if I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. We were staying in separate rooms. The idea of staying in different rooms of the house seemed odd, as if we were strangers. Despite the fact that I wouldn't have known how to handle myself had we been staying in the same room, I felt a rush of disappointment and frustration, that I knew I was being a hypocrite, because I wasn't ready for any sort of intimacy with him yet. This whole situation was complicated, and my emotions warred with each other. I shouldn't feel hurt by his actions of putting me in my own room, but here I was all I could muster at first, standing there as I tried not to let my confusion show. Gabriel gave me an appraising look, sensing that I wanted to say more, but he looked unsure as to whether he wanted to hear it. "Okay," I muttered. Apparently I could only handle one-word sentences at the moment. All of my small disappointments throughout the day were catching up to me. Gabriel clenched his jaw, avoiding my gaze. He seemed to have accurately gauged my confusion. "I think for now it's better that way. Mates weren't supposed to stay on opposite ends of a house, no matter how unconventional the relationship was." Once again, I noticed my own hypocrisy. I probably wouldn't have been able to handle sleeping in the same room as him, regardless, but the way he had been treating me all evening had really gotten to me, along with the unwelcoming and hostile treatment from his pack. My patience was wearing thin, and it was a difficult situation to begin with. Frustrated with him, I couldn't help but argue with his logic. "It's better to isolate me." Gabriel ran a hand through his tousled dark locks, clearly agitated. "It isn't isolation." "Yes, it is. You asked me to come here with you, away from my family and friends, and now you are shoving me to the side like you'd rather me not be here." I wasn't sure where this bravery was coming from, but my anger had been building up all day, and I was having a difficult time containing it. Gabriel's eyes flashed and he took a step back, balling his fist at his sides. "You're overreacting." "I am not. I spit out. You're either one. Why are you being so argumentative? His voice a growl. That was rich. Coming from him. Why are you being so cold to me? He hesitated. Irritation still plain in his expression. And I continued. I could be back home with my mom and dad. They can't protect you. Back at my pack village. With my friends. I continued recklessly. Is this house not good enough for you? Clearly agitated. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Gabriel demanded, eyes darkening, and I felt warning bells going off in my head. I began weakly, unsure what else to say. Gabriel suddenly roared, slamming his palm against the wall near him with such force that I swore I heard something splinter. If his hand had been in a fist, he surely would have punched through the wall. I swear that if that pup touches you again, I will fucking rip his throat out. Gabriel snarled in fury, his deep brown irises no longer visible. His pupils had expanded and I could tell his wolf was about to take over. I stood there, frozen in shock, my hands gripping the doorframe on either side on me. I was sure Gabriel was about to shift any moment and the logical side of me wanted to hightail it out of there before he could. I was still frozen in shock at his outburst, breathing heavily, deciding whether to back away or try to talk him down. Comfort him. Do it. My wolf snarled into my mind, her conviction washing over me in waves. I hesitated briefly. Part of me yearned to do just that, to ease his anger, as it was one of the things a mate was supposed to do, but I was still stubbornly furious, trying to set my thoughts straight. But before I could, Gabriel was already backing away. In going for a run, he seethed before I could say anything. He spun around and took off down the corridor, shoulders hunched and hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, still feeling somewhat numb after seeing him more infuriated than ever before. I slowly walked into my room and closed the door behind me, ignoring my wolf's reprimands in the back of my mind. I already felt guilty, even though it was Gabriel that had angered me in the first place. I could have helped him. I knew. I could have eased his anger. But I was still angry too. He dragged me all the way here and then treated me callously. We deserve better than that sort of treatment, I told my wolf. I slowly slid down the door into a crouching position, resting my head in my hands, lamenting my current situation. What had I gotten myself into?